When a senator has to remind a cabinet nominee what democracy even means, you know something's broken. What started as a normal confirmation hearing turned into one of the most uncomfortable exchanges the Senate's seen in years, and the man who stood up wasn't trying to make headlines. He was trying to save something bigger: oversight itself. Adam Schiff didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand, but when he finally spoke, the entire chamber fell silent, because for a few rare minutes the mask slipped. We saw what happens when power stops answering to the people. Imagine this senator sitting in a packed hearing room, cameras rolling, and instead of addressing the questions, the nominee Pam Bondi fires off pre-written personal attacks.
For a military-style assault on an apartment building in a major city, the zip tying of children. What was the legal basis for this? I heard my ranking member ask that very simple question, that completely appropriate question. If that's not an appropriate oversight question, I don't know what an appropriate oversight question is. And the response was not just to refuse to answer the question, but it was to attack the character of the ranking member and to insult him. And then when it was Senator Whitehouse's turn to ask a question, he asked a very legitimate oversight question about a FBI undercover operation in which reportedly $50,000 was paid to the White House border czar prior to him becoming the White House border czar, but with the expectation that he would be helpful in arranging contracts when he became the White House border czar. What happened to the money? A perfectly legitimate oversight question. And rather than answer that question in a closed investigation, not an open investigation, but a closed investigation, she simply attacked Senator Whitehouse personally. And I heard another one of my colleagues ask what was the legal basis for blowing up ships in the Caribbean. Reportedly, the Justice Department wrote an opinion justifying blowing up ships in the Caribbean. A perfectly legitimate oversight question, and the response was another personal attack. These, what were apparently canned, written personal attacks in advance. I wouldn't bother with the attacks on me. I've grown all too accustomed to them for the last 8 years. But if members of this committee can't ask those serious questions and get serious answers, we can't do oversight. I'm new to this committee. I spent about a decade on the House Judiciary Committee. I never saw a hearing like this with a cabinet officer, and if I did and some Democratic cabinet officer were to personally attack each of my Republican colleagues, I would call for a stop to it. It would be disgraceful. And I understand the reluctance to criticize on your side of the aisle one of the Republican cabinet members. But if this becomes the template for future hearings, we won't be able to do any oversight, and things will just degenerate. These questions deserve answers. I would expect that if troops were rappelling from helicopters in any city, in any of your states, and hog-tying children, you would want to know the legal basis. And so would I. We are going to submit for the record in written form the questions that the Attorney General refused to answer. I would hope, Mr. Chairman, you would join us in submitting those questions. They will have a much better chance of being answered if you join us in submitting those questions. But I would hope also in the future that if a witness, rather than respond, simply attacks our members, that it be stopped. That the witness be instructed to either answer the question or to state why they're refusing to answer the question, but to refrain from personal attacks on the members of this committee. That would be my request. And Mr. Chairman, I'm really grateful to be on this committee. And I appreciate every interaction I've had with you. You have, in our personal interactions, always been eminently fair. If I didn't think that you were of that character, I wouldn't even raise this because there wouldn't be a point. But I would ask that we not have another hearing like that one, and that you join in our legitimate oversight requests. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thought that I set the decorum for a hearing oversight hearing when I said before we asked the director of the FBI any questions or any statements that we should, both sides, treat each other with respect. And I even said to Patel, if you don't get a chance to answer your questions, I'll give you an opportunity after the senator's finished for a few minutes to respond whatever you didn't get a chance to say. And you know how that meeting turned out. And particularly from your side of the aisle, a lot of strong statements about the FBI director. Whether they were legitimate or not is beside the point. It didn't follow the decorum, and obviously the director of the FBI didn't follow the decorum. So I don't know what more I can do than plead with my people who are fellow senators to follow a certain decorum, and I assume it would be followed on the other side. I don't appreciate the insults that went to Democrat members, particularly where they were wrong, but after seeing how senators handled the FBI director, I guess I felt that just let the show go on the way the senators wanted to go on. And that's what developed as a result of it. That may be a weak excuse for what happened that day, but I thought things didn't work out the way I expected them to when the FBI director was here, and some of the people on your side of the aisle were some of the ones that were screaming and yelling and talking over the FBI director. Meeting adjourned.
Every legitimate question, every inquiry about the use of force, the spending of taxpayer dollars, the legality of covert operations, all brushed aside with cheap insults. You could see it on the senators' faces: shock, disbelief. And then Schiff leaned forward, calm but unflinching, and said what no one else dared to. He didn't just call it inappropriate, he called it dangerous. Because oversight, the right of Congress to question the executive branch, isn't a favor, it's the foundation of the republic. And watching it crumble in real time, that's the moment everyone in that room realized something far more serious was unfolding. But this wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about accountability and what happens when it disappears. During the hearing, members of the Senate raised serious questions about operations that sounded more like scenes from a war zone than law enforcement. Military-style raids, helicopters hovering over apartment buildings, reports of children zip-tied by agents in tactical gear. One senator even asked about a secret Justice Department opinion authorizing the destruction of ships in the Caribbean. Real questions, real stakes. And what did they get in response? Not answers, not explanations, just hostility. Schiff listened as one senator after another was personally attacked for doing their job. A question about a $50,000 undercover payment, ignored. A request for documentation on the legal basis of those raids, dismissed. Instead, Bondi's prepared responses targeted the questioners, not the questions. It was clear she'd walked in ready for a fight, not an interview. Schiff had seen this pattern before, the use of deflection as a weapon. Spend years on oversight committees and you learn the tricks: stonewall, mock attack, and eventually exhaust your opponents until the truth becomes buried under noise. But this time he refused to play along. He waited until the room quieted, then spoke with precision. No theatrics, no anger, just clarity. He pointed out that every question asked had been legitimate, grounded in oversight responsibility, and yet instead of providing information, the nominee had chosen to make it personal. Schiff warned that if this became the new normal, if witnesses could insult senators with no consequence, then oversight, the one mechanism that holds power accountable, would collapse. He reminded everyone that he'd served on the House Judiciary Committee for nearly a decade and had never seen a cabinet officer behave like this. The senators weren't being dramatic, they were being dismissed. And he called on the committee chair to take action, to stop the attacks and restore order before this toxic behavior became precedent. But what came next proved his fears were justified. Senator Grassley, the chairman, listened patiently and then shrugged. He tried to explain away the chaos by blaming both sides. He referenced an earlier hearing, saying that Democrats had also been harsh with the FBI director, implying this was some kind of payback. But that excuse missed the point entirely. Schiff wasn't demanding politeness. He was demanding accountability. Grassley's answer, or rather his lack of one, landed like a gut punch, because if the person running the hearing won't enforce the rules, then who will? When the Senate chair treats misconduct as a scheduling inconvenience, the signal to every future witness is clear: disrespect is tolerated, maybe even rewarded. And that's the quiet danger. It's not one dramatic scandal that kills oversight, it's the slow decay of standards. The idea that shouting down senators or mocking their questions is just another bad day at the office. Schiff understood that this moment wasn't an isolated lapse, it was part of a pattern. In recent years, more and more officials have started treating oversight as a personal attack. Instead of seeing it as a constitutional duty, they see it as opposition. Schiff's warning was simple: if this becomes the template, Congress will stop being a watchdog and start being a bystander. And that's when democracy stops functioning as designed. Think about it. When senators can't demand answers about raids, spending, or secret programs without being insulted, what's left? Who checks power then? It's not just a breakdown in decorum, it's a breakdown in the chain of accountability that separates democracy from authoritarianism. Schiff's statement wasn't loud, but it echoed. He reminded the committee that oversight isn't partisan, it's foundational. When the executive branch starts deciding which questions deserve answers, it's already rewriting the rules. And Bondi's performance that day wasn't confidence, it was contempt dressed up as control. The hearing should have been a straightforward exercise in transparency. Instead, it became a test of how far a nominee could push the limits of disrespect before someone stepped in. Schiff's patience snapped only after watching multiple senators, from different states, different backgrounds, get personally attacked for doing their jobs. He made clear that this wasn't just unprofessional, it was unconstitutional in spirit. And what did Grassley say in response? Essentially, it happens. That shrug told a bigger story than any headline could. It was the image of an institution too tired or too afraid to enforce its own rules. Because it's easier to move on than to confront the real issue, that the system designed to hold power accountable has started protecting it instead. What happened in that room wasn't theater, it was a stress test for the entire idea of checks and balances. Oversight isn't optional. It's the mechanism that prevents corruption, abuse, and secrecy from taking over. When Bondi turned her answers into attacks, she wasn't just disrespecting senators, she was rejecting the very notion that she owed anyone an explanation. That's why Schiff's moment mattered. He didn't come to the defense of one party or another, he came to the defense of the institution itself, and he did it knowing full well how it would be spun. That calling out misconduct would be labeled as grandstanding, that defending oversight would somehow be seen as political. But he did it anyway. Because when oversight dies, democracy doesn't collapse overnight, it erodes in silence. Through hearings like this one, where deflection replaces dialogue, where officials sneer instead of speak, where accountability fades behind the curtain of power. For viewers watching at home, it might have looked like just another hearing. But to anyone who's ever cared about how the government functions, it was a warning flare. Schiff's calm rebuke wasn't just about one day in the Senate, it was about the trajectory of a system losing its moral compass. He reminded everyone that oversight is supposed to make the powerful uncomfortable, that's its purpose. It's not there to make headlines or score political points, it's there to protect the public. When that process becomes hostile or performative, truth becomes collateral damage. Grassley's defense, his appeal to decorum, was supposed to sound even-handed, but what it really signaled was resignation, that even when faced with open disrespect, the Senate would rather avoid confrontation than demand accountability. And that resignation is how decay becomes the norm. Schiff knew it too. That's why he said what he said: if this behavior becomes the standard, oversight will die, not with a bang, but with a shrug. And when that happens, every citizen loses something precious, whether they realize it or not. It's easy to dismiss hearings like this as political theater, but the truth is, these rooms are where democracy either stands or falls. The questions being asked, about raids, spending, and secret operations, were about the people's right to know what their government is doing in their name. And when officials mock those questions, they're mocking that right. Every insult Bondi threw at a senator wasn't just an attack on a person, it was a message. You don't get to question me. Schiff's pushback flipped that message back on its head. Actually, that's exactly what we're here to do. He knew that once you let power decide which questions deserve answers, it stops being accountable to anyone. The hearing ended with tension still thick in the air, senators walking out frustrated, journalists whispering, cameras cutting away. But Schiff stayed calm, submitting the unanswered questions for the record, because paper trails matter, even when people stop listening. He knew the answers might never come, but the act of demanding them mattered, because oversight isn't measured by how many responses you get, it's measured by how many times you refuse to stop asking. Moments like this are easy to overlook in the 24-hour news cycle, but they're the cracks where light still gets in, where someone even briefly reminds us what public service is supposed to mean. Schiff didn't own anyone. He didn't seek applause. He simply refused to let the Senate sink into silence. In an era when outrage is currency, that quiet insistence on accountability might be the most radical act of all, because every time a public official uses insults to dodge responsibility, the public loses a piece of trust, and once that trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Think about how this hearing might look years from now, not as a one-off outburst, but as part of a timeline. A slow normalization of contempt for oversight. Each unchallenged insult becomes precedent, each unanswered question becomes permission for more secrecy, and each shrug from leadership becomes a silent endorsement. That's why Schiff's speech hit harder than any headline. It wasn't fiery rhetoric, it was a quiet alarm bell. A reminder that oversight isn't just about accountability, it's about respect. Respect for the Constitution, respect for the process, respect for the people who sent these officials there in the first place. Pam Bondi may have thought she was winning the exchange by refusing to answer, but all she did was show the country what happens when arrogance replaces transparency. Her deflections might have pleased the partisans, but to anyone paying attention, they exposed weakness, not strength. Because true confidence doesn't fear questions. True leadership doesn't hide behind pre-written insults. Schiff's composure in that moment, choosing restraint over retaliation, did more to restore dignity to the room than any gavel ever could. He wasn't just defending Democrats or Republicans. He was defending the idea that government should answer to its people, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient. That's what oversight means. And Grassley's shrug, that was a choice too. A choice to look away instead of stepping up. A choice that signaled to future witnesses that dodging and disrespecting senators would come without consequence. That's how decay spreads, not through chaos, but through complacency. By the time the gavel finally dropped, the message was clear. Schiff's words weren't just about one hearing, they were about the direction of American governance itself. The fact that he had to remind a cabinet nominee to respect oversight is proof of how fragile accountability has become. It's a warning that democracy doesn't vanish in one dramatic collapse. It fades through small acts of defiance that go unchecked, through witnesses who mock questions, through chairs who excuse them, through silence that replaces outrage. But here's the part that matters. People are watching, and awareness is the first step to change. The more citizens understand these hearings, the harder it becomes for officials to get away with deflection and deceit. Schiff wasn't speaking to Bondi that day. He was speaking to everyone who still believes government should answer to the governed. Because this wasn't just a fight for decorum, it was a fight for the principle that truth still matters, that transparency still has value. And that's why this moment deserves more than a headline. It deserves attention, memory, and action. If you're tired of watching hearings turn into shouting matches while real questions go unanswered, stay tuned. We're going to keep breaking down these moments, exposing the hypocrisy, and reminding people what accountability actually looks like. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video, because the more people see what's really happening inside these hearings, the harder it becomes for power to hide behind the noise. And if you want to go one step further, support this work on Patreon. Every contribution helps us stay independent and fearless, digging through the hearings others ignore, showing you what really goes on behind the polished soundbites, because democracy doesn't defend itself, people do. And right now that means staying informed, staying engaged, and refusing to look away, even when the truth gets uncomfortable. So keep watching, keep questioning, and remember, oversight only dies when we stop paying attention.